All right, we are live. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm just gonna sit here for about 30 seconds or so and kind of let everybody start to come into the Zoom room. So before we kind of get everything officially started, just wanna let everyone know we're excited to be with you today and sharing these insights. This is typically our most well-attended and most registered for webinar of the year. So we're really excited to be sharing some of these insights with you. And our presenters have prepared a really great dialogue for us today that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We can go on to the next slide. So a few housekeeping items for everybody to note throughout today's presentation. As a reminder, we will be sharing out the recording of this tomorrow. We'll be emailing it to everybody, whether you attended or not. As long as you register, you will be getting this recording. And then it is typically posted up on the website within a few days. Got a small adjustment to this slide. The full Giving Outlook report ebook is actually going to be releasing on the 20th, not the 18th, but you will be getting it next week. I saw the draft of it today, came back from the designer. It looks great. And so you'll be able to get that full report in your hands next week to really dive in and highlight and make notes and share with all of your colleagues. You can enter your questions in the Zoom Q&A. That's the little Q&A box that's at the bottom of your Zoom panel. And that is a great place for you to put in questions or any like logistical questions you might have about the webinar or anything that you are curious about learning more on a certain slide or getting a resource. And I will be moderating those questions throughout today's presentation. And so we have reserved kind of the final few minutes of today's presentation to go into those. And before we introduce today's speakers, I'd love to highlight a little bit about Pursuant. We are an agency that really focuses on merging data insights about your donors with the best strategy experience in the business. So we call our technology services the Giving DNA platform. And that is sort of two technology products that takes your data and slices and dices it in different ways and appends third-party insights on top of it that allows you to really dive deep into what makes your donors tick and why they support your organization, and give you some strategies for how you can engage them more. And then Concierge Giving is our agency service. And so we can help you make sense of the data that you're seeing and look at your overall strategy and help you make those adjustments and tests that you need to really be successful. And here's a little bit more about Giving DNA. Again, that is our suite of technology services that help you dive deep into those insights about what motivates your donors to take action, whether it's engage, give, support you on social, whatever that is. You can learn more about that at pursuant.com/giving-DNA. And I believe we'll have some additional calls to action at the end of this presentation if you're curious to learn more. The voice you're hearing is Leah Davenport, and I serve as the Senior Marketing Manager here at Pursuant. Glad to have you all with us today. Our first presenter that I would like to introduce to you is Jennifer Bielat, and Jennifer serves as our Executive Vice President of Client Strategy. And Jennifer is going to be unpacking what a lot of these trends that we're seeing in the market mean for your strategy as an organization, and how some of our clients are starting to apply them in their own fundraising strategies. We also have with us Matthew Mielcarek. Matthew is one of our analytics and insights gurus here at Pursuant, and he is one of the major authors, actually the major author of the Giving Outlook that you will be getting next week. And so he has looked at all the trends, all the charts, He's got his finger on the pulse of what is going on in the fundraising landscape. And so I am thrilled to hand things off to him now so that he can get into our content.
Thank you, Leah and Jennifer. So glad to be presenting with you today. Hey, everyone. I want to kick off with a few questions. How many soft drinks have you had today? And how has that number of soft drinks you drink changed over the past 10 years? If you're like most Americans, you're drinking less. And in fact, sales of soft drinks have been declining every year for the past 13 years in a row. Bottled water is now the #1 beverage in the US, and it has been since 2018. As people are seeking healthy alternatives, as more millennials wield their consumer influence, bottled water has become #1 as consumer behaviors change. I have another question for you. We know that migration from traditional retail to online is well underway, but I'm wondering if you subscribe to Stitch Fix online, or have you subscribed to any new service this year like Blue Apron, Dollar Shave Club, Birchbox? I think there's one for pets. Subscription services like this have grown by more than 100% each year over the past 5 years. And people find value for a lot of reasons. Some say that they save them time and money. Some people like these subscription services because they offer discounts. Others like the exclusive benefits that a club like this can provide. And some, and I hear this is especially true about Stitch Fix, is they like the highly curated experience that's created just for them, for their personal needs, for their personal interests. But adoption of these subscription services threatens brick and mortar retail, and it can also threaten the transactional e-commerce companies that have been set up to sell clothing, in this case, on a one-off perspective, once at a time. And so those traditional models are threatened as consumer behaviors change. Let's shift a little bit to this year. I hope you haven't had to visit a doctor's waiting room recently, but we know that waiting in general is no fun, particularly if a room is crowded or if it's crowded with infectious people. I had a doctor's visit recently, had never been to him before, and I was able to meet with him over FaceTime. It was a lot more fun than taking an afternoon off from work and driving 30 or 45 minutes through Austin, Texas traffic to his office just to meet with him for 15 minutes. So we all know that telemedicine is booming today, and it makes me wonder, why couldn't I do this last year? I don't want to go back to the old way later on. So post-COVID, providers and insurance companies are going to feel a lot of pressure to continue to offer their patients these types of services as consumer preferences and behaviors change. Let's finally bring it home to the nonprofit space. Have you attended a fundraising event recently? I think the answer is pretty much the same for all of us, sadly. We know that peer-to-peer events and galas have been decimated this year. For many donors, these events were the introduction to an organization, to the community, an introduction to the cause. And so without those vehicles to acquire constituents, to engage and build relationships, we're in a bit of a void, a bit of a vacuum right now, because we know that that desire to connect and engage remains, but the peer-to-peer model is challenged as these consumer behaviors change. Where these behaviors are transitioning is unknown, and I wish the answer was as easy as saying it's migrating as simply as to bottled water, but we know it's a lot more complex than that. And I gather that a lot of you have been forced to pivot dramatically this year, innovating and charting the course for your donors who want to engage in this manner, but who are disconnected. So right now, a lot of us are scrambling to find a home in place for these donors. And it's understandable when you consider the current landscape and the current environment of where we are right now. Almost half of US households have suffered an income decline due to the pandemic. So whether through layoffs, reduced hours, reduced pays, a lot of squishy definitions in between there. But generally, we know that household incomes are declining. Pandemic hotspots have emerged recently in southern states. And regardless of where the next hotspot is or where you live, we're all concerned about the opening of schools this fall, the impact that it will have on our children, and further surging of cases. We also know right now, in our latest closed quarter Q2, the GDP contracted to its worst level since 1946. That's pretty stark on its own. But another stat that I recently came across is that that's almost 10% from the prior year Q2. That means effectively that a tenth of American productivity vanished on a year-over-year basis. So pretty dramatic changes underfoot. And lastly, we've got the election ahead. So I don't know that I need to say anything else about that in particular, but a lot of factors swirling. I'd say the net from all of this is that these economic factors have added up to create a huge shock to unemployment and to employment, rather to employment and unemployment, to demand, and then to the relationships within these traditional consumer patterns. So the ability to buy things or otherwise. For example, some estimates have shared that we have vaulted 10 years ahead in terms of digital penetration during quarantine, during this pandemic, and through our use of digital channels. That is really profound. I've also read that more consumers are trying new brands and trying new retailers than they ever have before. So really an impact on brand loyalty as folks are seeking brands that are more available and accessible to them in channels where they are frequenting. So often online, perhaps more so through social. A lot of the brands that folks are open to now are either cheaper or consumers are seeking a better value. For me, the net of all of that, with all of those factors in play, is that donor beliefs and behaviors are changing as well, and they are changing fundamentally. The way that donors give has shifted. And what I'd say is, and Jennifer's going to share a lot of that, is that the shock means that in the short term, giving has often been sporadic and unconventional outside of ways they typically have. But as we prepare and retool for the long term, this is also going to impact change as well. I do want to share one other factor, and that is that we are fundraising in the time of Alexa, where we can control our lives magically by voice. And if I can order and summon a pizza delivery man by the end of this webinar with my voice, I now want that experience with everything. The bar has moved and nonprofits need to move with it. And so I think this is a really important factor when we talk about all of this change together.
So I'm going to go ahead and pick it up from here. Similar to the consumer examples that Matthew just shared, philanthropy is transforming and it's happening right before our very eyes. You know, we've seen donor behaviors changing over many years. If you think about how behaviors changed with online giving, right? The first websites and the ability to take a donation online. And then as soon as we figured out how to do that, social media was thrust upon us, and you know, we lost a little bit of control there. You know, we've seen giving vehicles also emerge, things like crowdfunding and donor advised funds. But we've never seen disruption, the pace of disruption like we are right now in the face of the current pandemic. And how we respond to that as an industry and to the needs of our donors are really going to set the stage for our future. The nonprofit industry, we're unique in our willingness to share information. And every year, trusted partners and leaders across the industry give back through reports and thought leadership. And it's all in the spirit of advancing the greater good. And each year, Pursuant Giving Outlook, we aggregate those headlines and trends from all the various reporting sources to bring you our take on the current fundraising landscape and what we believe lies ahead. And we like to look at overall fundraising, direct response, online programs, and with insights by vertical. This year, we had a new report come on the scene, and I want to give thanks to our friends at Merkle. They created what they called the COVID-19 direct mail fundraising report. And it was issued weekly for a while, and now we're getting it twice a month. So our goal with this webinar and the information we're sharing today is to really empower each of you as leaders to take the information that we're going to share, the tools and the resources that you need from this webinar to best position your organization to respond to what's happening today and to stay nimble for what's likely to come tomorrow. So let's take a look at 2019, first of all. So looking back at 2019, in many ways, it was much simpler. We saw giving trends that were returning to more normal patterns that we understood. And so, you know, when we take a look at the reports, one of the most forward-looking prediction report that we can put our hands on is a report called the Philanthropy Outlook, and it's produced by the Lilly School of Philanthropy. And what they were projecting in 2019 was that we would see growth in both 2020 and 2021, and they expected that growth to be higher than 40-year historic averages. Giving USA also was reporting overall increases in giving, 2.4% over the prior year, and also individual giving was reported at an increase of 2% as well. Category giving was across the board up: individuals, foundations, bequests, corporations, all-time highs or nearly all-time highs. And what was really nice to see as well through the M&R report was that we saw double-digit increases again within online revenue. And that was something that we missed last year in 2018. But as we look at where we are today in 2020, it's far from normal. And the reporting that we have at our disposal leaves us with many more questions than we have answers. However, there are early trends emerging, and we can take some stock in those. And so most of the data that I'm about to share with you is as recent as the end of the second quarter, and it provides us with a bit of a mid-year snapshot. So let's take a look at direct mail. This is coming from reports from Merkle, and direct mail's been that industry long-time workhorse, and so it's comforting to see that that's stable. You know, donations were up nearly 5% year over year, with all sectors either seeing flat or increased revenue. And the positive revenue trend was being fueled not just by more donations, but also a substantial increase in average gift. And that's a trend we've been seeing for a while, right? Average gifts going up year over year. And that has translated into overall revenue being up over 29%. In 2018, donor advised funds represented 12.5% of all giving by individuals. And we're continuing to see increased donations coming from DAFs. In fact, Fidelity Charitable, they reported distributions up 16% over the same period last year. And what's important to note here is that these distributions reflect designations and release of funds previously contributed to a DAF. So we talk a lot about money, lots of money going into donor advised funds, but what's happening right now is more distributions are happening year over year. So if you haven't taken the time to think about your strategy for how to get a greater piece of that pie, now's the time to hustle around that. So let's take a look at new donor trends. So the pandemic has yielded many more new donors. However, overall new donor acquisition remains flat. And what we saw in the early days of the pandemic was some shifting of giving to sectors like international relief and human services. Additionally, what we saw, which is a little bit unique, of course, to the pandemic, was we saw a surge of hyper-local giving. So as we saw our favorite restaurants and local shops and businesses, you know, being shut down for periods of time, there was more giving being funneled to local organizations. A little bit later on in our presentation, Matthew's going to share a little bit about what these new donors look like, and I think some of what you'll see will be a bit surprising. So when we look at the gifts and the giving, in response to the crisis, we've seen extraordinary generosity. There's been $11.4 billion raised to date to address COVID-19 and another $7.6 billion towards racial equity. However, much of that giving is being driven by general level donors. And we define those donors as donors that are giving under $250. So a lot of giving from some of our smaller donors, while mid-level and major donor revenue has been down. This giving pattern of smaller gifts coming from donors is not a new pattern for us. In fact, if we look back to the Great Recession, we saw a very similar pattern. But what we can be sure of, and what gives me continued optimism, is just the sheer generosity of American people. It never ceases to amaze me. So broadly, the industry for quite some time has been suffering from a donor loyalty crisis. And we don't yet know the impact of the lack of our ability to host our 2020 events on what that will have to already weakened retention. We are seeing organizations put resources, both people and dollars, towards stewardship efforts and intentional mid-level and upgrade programs, all in the expectation of seeing improvements in retention and giving from their existing donors. We've also seen with traditional acquisition channels under pressure, taking care of those donors is paramount, and that organizations that invest during times like this always emerge stronger than their peers that don't put forth the effort of really paying attention to your very best donors. Matthew mentioned this in his remarks, and it's worth noting again. In the consumer space, we are seeing brand loyalty disrupted. And it's not just channel behavior, but this willingness to try new brands. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't taken a careful look at what your organization's unique value proposition is or your case for support, if you haven't done that in a while, it would be a good time to put some energies towards that. Well, with all of the face-to-face fundraising channels being hard hit by the pandemic, it's forced leaders to innovate and to look to technology to retool and create virtual engagement. We've seen acceleration and investment happening around digital transformation for organizations across the board. For some sectors like arts and culture, they're scrambling a little bit to determine, how can they deliver the core of their mission remotely, and they're looking to digital for that. Other sectors have been more ready to respond during a time like this, and they're leveraging that digital footprint to stay connected and deliver experiences that continue to engage their supporters. We've also seen a renaissance in some channels like telemarketing. As we've quarantined and sheltered, the phone became a lifeline for many organizations, and they used that to connect with their donors for both stewardship and fundraising. And the thing that has been great is we've seen with the use of phone, contactability rates were some of the highest in recent history. And then what was really fun for us last week was an experience that Matthew had. The doorbell rang, and on the other side of the door was an individual doing door-to-door fundraising for a child sponsorship organization. So I guess, you know, as I think about all the different channels that we have available, it looks like some of our old friends are back, and what is old is new again. So
Jennifer, the best part was we joined, okay, too.
that's right. I forgot
we
that.
Joined.
Yes.
We joined.
They were very persuasive.
That's right. That's right. They were.
So, you know, midway through June, this is just a snapshot and it's far from complete. There are so many unanswered questions, you know, yet to come with 4 months left in the year and, you know, what's going to happen. But here are a few things that, you know, we've been thinking about. You know, are event donors and major donors taking a break? Or will their affinity for the organizations they support drive them to alternate fundraising channels? Will we see them show up on mail or donor advised funds or online? Is channel migration occurring, or is it already reflected in our existing trends? And are COVID donors really new? And if they are, will they stick around after the crisis is over? And what will the impact be of traditional acquisition like events in the new normal? I'm sure you have questions too. And, you know, I'd invite you to go ahead and use that Q&A functionality and put some of your own questions in there, and we'll try to find some time at the end to answer those. Our story for 2020 obviously is continuing to be written with each passing month. And what we do know for certain is that philanthropy is transforming, and as leaders, we need to stay nimble and we need to be ready to evolve with it. So how do we do that? I would say the answer lies in the data, and I'm gonna hand it back to Matthew to expand on that.
Yeah. What I'd share is that around Pursuant, we often say that data wins arguments. And with so many fundamental questions remaining, we say that data can also chart the path ahead for us. Excuse me. Data gives us early insight into changing behaviors as they are happening. It helps us to see the opportunity for greatest impact. We need to stop thinking about data as really a byproduct of transactions, but really as the core product that makes up our organizations, or at least the development side of the house. So in these times of uncertainty, Jennifer, myself, and Pursuant would argue that data can now be the great stabilizer. And leveraging data has to really be at the heart of our organizations and at the heart of our strategies. Collect, analyze, monetize. Every nonprofit can now be a data company, whether they know it or not, by collecting, analyzing, and monetizing their data. Those nonprofits that are thriving today, that thrive through these tough times, will be doing more with less and maximizing their efforts really with data-driven insights. So we'd like to shift the remainder of our discussion to share and show you how organizations that we're working with today are currently leveraging data in this environment to maximize their own results. And so what we'll do is unpack the ways that the organizations are using data to support and affirm strategies. And we are trying to be fairly specific in ways that you can replicate on your own as well. So the first one I want to share that may ring true for many of you on this call, depending on your mission and your program needs, is identifying COVID donors that are likely to convert. And what I mean by that is, for many organizations, it's likely that you've had an influx of COVID-related donors. But as Jennifer shared, we often wonder if those donors are going to behave and act like traditional disaster response donors, which is very transactional, bouncing onto the file every couple of years and giving episodically. Or will these new COVID donors migrate to become long-term mission-based donors? We believe that the answer is both of those things, and that you can't discount the source of new donors wholesale, but instead we need to understand who they are more closely, and then identify those with the greatest likelihood and propensity to do so. The ways that our clients at Pursuant are doing this is using our Giving DNA platform to really distinguish those that are charitable from those that are not. And this particular example is a healthcare-based organization. And what they were able to do is use augmented intelligence recommendations from the platform to really sort through those new COVID donors, and specifically identify those who had a history of giving to health-related organizations in the past 12 months, and then also who had the capacity to give at a certain giving threshold. By doing that, we're able to not discount the complete COVID donor population or base entirely from subsequent strategies. And instead, we're able to lean forward and into those that are most likely to take a next step and support us on an ongoing mission-based perspective. What's really exciting about this as well is that as new names flow into the donor universe, this screening is ongoing, and it can occur and continue to identify those just as they're entering our universe. A next step and way that nonprofits are using data to maximize their results is then to understand the profile of their donors and the profile of their constituency. So on the previous slide, once we have identified who are mission potential COVID donors, we also want the ability to describe them so that we can reach and engage them. So certainly demographics are important. We want to understand age, gender, giving capacity of these new donors who are flowing onto our file. But things like channel responsiveness can dramatically enhance the response rates that we're getting through our strategies and programs. Things like capacity or even life stage insights, that someone is retired, someone is starting a first job, someone is married, someone has children 18 and under. All of those factors really come into play. And what Jennifer shared earlier in terms of refining and honing a case for support, we are now working with our clients to understand their new COVID acquired donors and really to assess if they are a viable acquisition channel for follow-up engagement. In doing so, we are creating a unique case for support based on this profile, which we call donor DNA at Pursuant, and then crafting and creating programs for them to engage them in a way that might be different from the traditional base of donors. One of the key insights that we're finding as we look at the profile of COVID donors is typically these folks responded online, at least they did in the early days. We're seeing, a lot of direct mail response right now as well. But we're seeing, I would say, proclivity towards online channel. We're seeing donors younger, so they're not young or quite young, but we're seeing a lot more 45-year-old, 35-year-old age range donors and less of 65-year-old age range donors than what we might see on the traditional base. And then a lot of those COVID donors as well, surprisingly, are as affluent as their peers. So a younger profile, typically more affluent. And then what we're finding specifically is that the more homogeneous a traditional donor file might be, the more different these COVID donors might be. So I think some of the starkest differences we have seen are for hospital foundations that we've worked with, where the traditional donor base might be older major donor gifts, and what we've seen is really tremendous online giving from a younger demographic at lower dollar levels. So really a great source of acquisition and truly diversifying a file overall.
So when I think about using data, it's not just about the new donors, but it's also about those donors that have been with you for a long time, right? Those multi-year donors where we raise lots and lots of money. You know, and as we talked about earlier, traditional acquisition is under pressure. So it is so important for us to take care of the donors that we already have. Stewardship remains a vital part of any program, and it's what we lean on to increase giving and retention. And usually in times like this, organizations tend to look towards stewardship because it doesn't have that immediate short-term ROI, and they look at cutting initiatives like that. However, now's the time to actually prioritize your investments around stewardship, and to do that through examining who those very best donors are. We have one of our faith-based clients who has continued their stewardship program, and in fact, they mailed a newsletter at the height of the pandemic wave. It was mailed in April, and their donors came out with overwhelming generosity, and they ended up donating 3 times as much as what was projected. So think about, you know, how has your communication strategy continued, or has it been disrupted? And if it has been disrupted, is there opportunity to get that back on track? And, you know, most importantly, you know, how are you taking care of those most valuable donors if you aren't able to invest in things like a newsletter? There's other ways to connect with them.
So the fourth way that folks are using data to maximize their results is to screen for those ready and likely to upgrade. And specifically, we've had a ton of conversations recently about mid-level. So we work with an animal welfare organization that's generally regional, and they are working to seek and establish an upgrade program with really limited resources targeted to their mid-level and major donors. They're really ramping up and have aspirations and goals to grow at the mid-level, at the major level. And using recommendations from our data platform, the organization was able to start to screen donors who are ready to upgrade to the mid-level. So what that means is they're ranking donors by their giving frequency as well as mid-level capacity. And as they do that, as they build this list, as they sort through all of their donors to identify those most likely to upgrade to the mid-level, they have found opportunity. So they created an elevated experience for these prospects, and specifically that meant personal reach out, both through phone calls as well as individualized emails. And what they were able to find was a donor who had previously given a $2,500 single gift, and she was ready to make a $100,000 gift. So certainly a story that we would all like to replicate as we build and engage our programs. And this organization was able to use data to screen and prioritize those within their universe, and specifically to find mid-level prospects. As their program develops and advances, we can certainly elaborate and create not only groups of individuals who are prospects, but also those who are actually now at the mid-level, who we can engage with that unique, elevated experience. And ultimately, we can even connect the donor pyramid to major gifts, to both qualification as well as connecting to the major gifts program. So using data allows us to bring those insights and recommendations from our platform to then determine and prioritize our resources and treatments for those unique audiences.
Hey, Matthew.
Uh-huh.
We had one quick question come in that might be helpful. So one person wanted to know, could you define a mid-level versus a major gift?
Yeah, it's pretty subjective based on who the organization might be. So we could define it any way that that you might draw it out. I would say our standard breakdown in the way that we would define general might be a $0 to $1,000 gift, and then mid-level might be $1,000 to $10,000, and then major might be $10,000 or more. That's pretty much a standard breakout that we would follow. I would say that some health related organizations, foundations, or otherwise, typically might bump up their major gift qualification to $25,000 or even $100,000. So it kind of depends on the program. And then on the other side, there might be organizations that are really just getting started, that really have no mid-level or major gifts, resources, or programs similar to the organization that I shared. And so those organizations might ratchet down their definitions a bit. So they might consider mid-level 500 instead of 1,000, and have maybe that $500 go up to $1,500, and then consider that next level major. So so a lot of organizations play with that. I would say it differs somewhat by vertical and what your program looks like.
Okay, so we can also use data to help us evaluate our plans and where we put our investments. And we know we're not in a business as usual environment right now where we're planning once a year. We know that boards and leaders are being asked to continue to evaluate and refine their strategies right now. And it's important to use your data to be able to make informed decisions about where's the best place to make those investments and where to double down and where you might want to take some investments and put them elsewhere. We've been partnering with several of our clients over the last many months to evaluate options for growth. One of our clients who's actually in the healthcare space wanted to have a better understanding of what the investments needed to look like over time in order to reach a goal that they had around their file, and in particular reaching what we call a coverage ratio. And so they wanted to make sure that they had enough donors coming in to offset any type of attrition that they had on the file. And so we looked at it from two different perspectives. One was, what if we went into acquisition in a much more aggressive stance? What would that look like from an investment perspective? The other scenario was to take a look at, what if we took a more moderate approach to acquisition, but actually took some dollars and invested heavily in stewardship to kind of improve our retention at the same time we were bringing in new people? What would that look like? And so those have been very valuable for our clients as they've set their budgets, not only for this year, but as they've been planning for fiscal year 21. So it's not easy to plan scenarios for growth or to know kind of what to look at. And so what we've tried to do to help you is to create what we call a scenario planning tool. And it leverages our projections methodology and our fundraising expertise, and it brings together your data. So bringing in your performance data from the past into a scenario like this, it's simple to use. It allows you to do a lot of what if scenarios and really make some good bets with how you want to budget, how you want to put your investments, and frankly too, what kind of resources you might need to achieve some of the goals that you're setting out for yourself. We're going to make this available to you in a download, and towards the end we'll share with you when it's going to be available and how to go about getting access to this. So we've had a pandemic, we're in a pandemic, we're in a recession right now. We're experiencing protests across our country. And of course, we've got an election coming up. So 2020, whew, it's thrown a lot at us. But through these crises and the adversity that we face, we also see the best in humanity and that ingenuity that comes from the human spirit to evolve and to innovate. And, you know, this is a very challenging time. There's external influences that are changing weekly, sometimes even daily. And none of us has a crystal ball. And I'm sure there are plenty of times already that you're wondering if you've made the right decision. Just know that you're not in that alone. And as we wrap up, we want to share with you 3 things that you can be doing right now to continue to lead strongly during this time. The first one, if you haven't caught the theme, we want you to take command of your data. There is a lot of information that can help guide the way, and that starts with understanding your donors. And so the first thing that I want you to do is I want you to sign up for a demo of our Giving DNA platform. I'm sure some of you on the call are already using the platform and finding success. I want everyone to take this invitation and check it out. I think you'll be blown away by what you'll learn. That's different than what you might think you know about your donors. The second thing is exploring scenarios. So I would love for you to download that scenario planning tool and get with your colleagues and play around with that. That download will be available Wednesday, that's August 12th. And it's simple and it's easy to use. And so that will be a great resource for you as you continue to be asked by leadership, your C-suite and your boards to take a look at your performance and what needs to change. And the last thing that I would share is be nimble and bold. You know, continue to recalibrate. Know that you're not going to get it 100% right, but you're not alone, and we're here to help you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I wanted to share too, so as many of you go on your journeys from here and seek to embrace change, we've been working with clients in recent months through an approach we call our fundraising strategy assessment. So it combines fundraising expertise with many of the prescriptive analytics that we've talked about to quickly recalibrate fundraising programs for the months ahead. So an additional resource for you guys, we'd love to have conversations with you about that ahead that talks about taking, again, the best parts of expertise, technology, and putting them together for you if you or your organization is stuck or having difficulty embracing and holding on to the changing behaviors of your donors. So, so thanks so much for that.
All right, here's where I take things back over to get us ready for the Q&A. As a quick reminder, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, that we will be releasing the full report that Matthew and Jennifer have worked to put together. That will be going out next week, August 20th, which I believe is a Thursday. So keep a look on your inbox for that. All right, now we have time for some Q&A. So Matthew, we had a really great question come in about the scenario planning tool that's going to be released tomorrow. And that is, what data is required to use the projections tool that we'll be sharing?
Yeah, I love it. That's a great question. So it's just about 3 tabs long. So you see almost all of it here. And I would say the core inputs are revenue, gift data, and donor data. So if you have those 3 inputs, you can use the scenario planning tool. There are quite a few options that you can add. So specifically, you can address and include online channel information and online channel insights. And then also, you can incorporate budget and budgetary figures. I think those are required for use. But it's fairly simple, I would say. Most of the organizations we typically work with are participating and using the tool in that regard. The output is so cool. At the far right, you see revenue, donor, and budget charts. So I don't like this picture. So we looked at other scenarios with this client. And the last thing I'd say is this takes really the best aspects of our rigorous projections approach and experience and has really simplified them. So if you need assistance or help beyond this free resource, please don't hesitate to reach out and have a conversation about it with us, and we can help you with more robust tools for more robust strategic planning or transformation that you may have in your future.
Thanks, Matthew. Elizabeth had a really great question, and she wants to know, so recognizing there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, generally speaking, does investment in acquisition or in stewardship yield a greater return when it comes to donor coverage? So intelligent, great question.
I love it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak to that one. So I will say to you, you need both, right? So when we think about coverage ratio, yeah, you could go at it with either one, but it would become a very expensive proposition. When we think about coverage ratio, we want to pull on a couple of different levers. One is acquisition. Of course, we need new warm bodies. The other is that idea of retention, right? We want to hang on to the donors that we have, and especially if you're engaging in new donor acquisition, you don't want to have them coming in the door to leave you, next year, right? So retention is really important. That's where the stewardship comes in. And the third part is leveraging, again, this goes back to the data, looking at your lapsed donors. Right, so reactivation is a very important part of coverage ratio as well. So of those donors that lapse, which ones can we bring back into the fold? So you really want to look at it through the lens of all three of those tactics.
Awesome. And Jennifer, I can't remember if this was covered earlier in the presentation, but what is the donor coverage ratio?
Yeah, so we like to look at that, and if you think about it from the standpoint of sort of a water table, if you will, organizations want to see a coverage ratio of 100%. That means you're stable, right? And that again, when it's a combination of looking at retention of previous donors, how many new donors are coming in, how many are you reactivating, and how many are lapsing out the back door. So it's a way for you to again, measure the health of your program. Sometimes you'll see a coverage ratio that's less than 100%, and that may be perfectly fine because of maybe a divestment in strategy, right? And so that you don't have to be alarmed if you see something that's a little bit less than 100%, but if you're continuing to see year upon year, that downward trend, there's something there that you need to pay attention to. Conversely, if you're over 100%, that means you're growing, but all growth is not created equal. So again, you want to make sure that you're growing in a way that's healthy and you're bringing the right kinds of donors into your organization, and they're not just coming in a transactional mode, right? They're donors that you can continue to bond to your mission and create experiences that's going to lead to greater giving.
Great. If there are any additional questions that any of our attendees have today, I invite you to send them to us at marketing@pursuant.com, and we'll get those in front of our strategists to get an answer to you. But if there are no further questions,
looks like we had something.
There we go. Here we go. They want to know, can you give an example of the donor coverage formula? We have a slide on this that visualizes it. It's not in this particular presentation, but could you sort of explain that, Jennifer?
Yeah, I can. It is absolutely a math calculation. So it is your previous donors, right? The donors that you currently have, minus the those that are lapsing out, divided by the number that you're actually bringing through the door. So What we could probably do too, Leah, since there's some interest in organizations being able to calculate that on their own, maybe we can make that as a, you know, something that's downloadable or available to them after the webinar too.
Definitely, that's a great idea. All right, well, if there are no further questions, again, we'll see if one pops up while I'm wrapping up here. Thank you everyone who had who took out some time of their day to attend this presentation. I hope it was helpful for you. And if there are any additional topics that you would like to see covered, you know, we want to make sure that we're resourcing you and where you are at in your fundraising journey and in the decisions that you are making this time of year. So please feel free to get in touch with us. There's a few different ways you can do that. You can email Matthew or Jennifer. Those are their email addresses down below. You can also reach out to me as well, and that is leah.davenport@pursuant.com. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you, feedback, comments, questions, and look for some of these tools that we referenced to be showing up in your inbox in the next few days.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for joining us.